So pre-release time has snuck up on us. Next week we are having the second anniversary or the OP09 pre-release events starting. Yeah, if you haven't been to one of the anniversary or pre-release events, they're the same thing, just different names. They will run one of two ways. The first is a constructed event, which is basically what you do every week at locals. You'll bring your decks, you'll play a tournament, and the winner takes home the prizing. The second way, which is the way more fun and entertaining way, is a sealed event. And how this works is you'll get 6 packs. So in this case, you'll get 6 packs of OP09. You'll open them up and you'll build a 40 card deck using those cards. Now, there are some slight variations to deck building rules when it comes to these pre-release events. First of all, there are no color restrictions, so you can mix and match all the colors. And the other is there is no card copy limit. So if you pull 6, 7, 10, 20 of the same card, you can include them all in your deck, no worries. An important rule to make note of as well, which I think some people forget, you are allowed to sideboard with these events. So the cards that you don't put in your 40 card deck, you can swap, change them out between games. Now these events will start next Friday, the 6th of December. Registration is open for these, so go and check your Bandai apps. Now on screen we can see the participation that you get. So if you just turn up to the event, you register, you pay, this is what you'll get. You'll get a promo Luffy. This is a card that we have seen floating around sometimes before, I believe. And then we get an anniversary pack. So this will come with 2 cards, and it's basically all the commons and the uncommons from OP09 with a anniversary stamp, similar to the pre-release stamp, similar to the first anniversary stamp we've seen with these other events. And then you also get a nice looking Don card right there. Now, as for the winner of the event, the winner will pick up a copy of each of these cards here. So these are just reprints from the Star Deck 13 leaders, the Sabo, the Ace, and the Luffy. Actually really nice artworks for all of these. Now let's talk about leaders, because specifically for these sealed events, you can bring your own leader, bring your own Don as well, don't forget that, but you can bring your own leader to add to your 40 card deck. So up on screen now, we have some of the proven leaders when it comes to the sealed events. First of all, we have Zoro. If you pop a Don under Zoro, all your characters gain 1000 power, which is pretty nice. We have the Captain Kid. So his effect there is activate main. Once per turn, you can rest 3 Don, trash a card from your hand, and you can restand or reactivate that leader, which allows you to get some nice pressure, swing multiple times. End game, you can get 2 swings at 12k. Then we've got Katakuri here. Pop a Don on Katakuri. When you attack, you're going to be attacking for 7k, and you can check out what's coming in your life or your opponent's life. And then we've got Bonnie. So Bonnie, you rest a Don on your opponent's turn when they attack to rest one of their leaders or characters. So basically, your opponent's always going to have 1 less attack each turn as long as they have multiple bodies out on the board. Now, out of the 4 here, I'd probably say the better 2 are the 2 green ones, the Captain Kid and the Bonnie. The Captain Kid just because it's nice and aggressive, and the Bonnie is because it's just very oppressive for your opponent to deal with. Now, if you do want to play some new leaders, these are probably the better options. We'll start off with Shanks. So Shanks from OP09, once per turn, you may activate this effect when your opponent attacks. You can give one of your opponent's leaders or characters minus 1000 power for the turn. So basically you have a free 1k counter every single turn, which is quite nice. It's like similar to Bonnie, where we're kind of interrupting our opponent's turn, but I feel like the Bonnie is slightly better just because you can completely stop 1 attack regardless of how big that body is. But nonetheless, if you want to play a new leader, Shanks is a great option. The next one that we have from OP09 here is Nico Robin. So Robin has built-in banish, which is actually really good when it comes to these events. Hand size is really important, counter is really important, that's why Shanks is good, and which is why Robin can also be good. The only downside to Robin is a 4 life leader, which you generally do want to kind of stay away from them. Now, there have been some good 4 life leaders, like the green yellow Yamato and the blue red Marco, both great options. Probably wouldn't go with the green yellow Yamato in this set because we have access to a lot of blockers. The Marco might not be a bad option as well. The rest of Robin's effect there is when attacking, you may trash a card with trigger from your hand and you can ramp it Don rested. That part of the effect may only come up depending on how many triggers you pull. There are a few in this set, but you're not guaranteed to see a lot of them. Now, next up we have Sanji. This is from PRB01, not an OP09 leader, but is one that we can use. And I think Sanji is actually low-key a pretty good choice when it comes to the sealed event. So Sanji's effect, activate main once per turn, up to one of your 8 cost or less characters without an on-play effect gains rush. Now, vanillas are pretty key when it comes to these sealed events. So you're going to have a lot of cards that don't have an on-play effect, which you can just be super aggressive with. with Sanji. And then you do have some other good cards that have some nice stat lines that don't have on-play effects but may have some other effects like when attacking as well. So just keep an eye out for those as we go through the other key cards for these events. But I think Sanji will be a great pick. Now, I've got here on screen a Rainbow Luffy. Now, technically, Rainbow Luffy isn't legal for these events, but some stores will allow you to play with Rainbow Luffy. So just check in with your store before you go to the event if they allow it. And if they do, I'll have a little section at the end of this video where we'll talk about cards specific to Rainbow Luffy that become good because you have his wonderful effect, which basically is Luffy becomes every color and every name and every type that's in existence, so you can get access to some other cards. So now we're going to be talking about key cards. So if you see these cards, put them in regardless of what leader you're running, and then we'll talk about some filler cards and maybe some cards specific to certain leaders. And then at the end, we'll show you a place where you can simulate, open up packs that you can put into the sim and play test with your friends. First of all, let's talk about the 2K counters. So there are a total of 14 2K counters that we have access to. As you can see, the breakdown of the rarities on the screen here. We've got 2 rares, 2 commons, and the rest are uncommon. So it might be a mixed bag of how many that you see, but basically whatever ones that you see, put them in, run them. 2K counters are going to be awesome for these events. Now, going over some ones that have some cool abilities, key effects you might need to be aware of. The first one here is Lime Juice. So the on-play effect for this one is one of your opponent's characters with 4,000 power or less cannot activate the blocker effect. There are a few smaller blockers which fall into that. You do have access to some power reduction as well in this sealed format, so that could be bigger blockers as well that Lime Juice can stun. Next up, we have the Shiryu. This one is Don times on when attacking. You trash 2 cards from your hand, then you draw 2. So you must trash 2 first and then draw 2, but a great way to kind of fix your hand if you're real bricky or you're not seeing cards that you need in that moment. Next up, we have Porgus the Ace. So this is on play if you have 2 or more rested characters in play. Rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less. So this does have some requirement there. You do need to have 2 or more rested characters when you play. So it may or may not come up, but just great to be aware of. Can rest pretty much most of the blockers that are available to us in this set. Rest some characters just so you can also help control the board as well. Next up, we're going to have a look at the blockers. So there are 15 blockers that are available to us. Technically 14. One is a blocker only if you activate a certain effect. As you can see, they kind of vary in their cost and their power. You got a few of your chump blockers with your 2 cost 2,000 power, and we kind of slowly build our way up. And as you can see with Lime Juice, you're hitting a bunch of them automatically without needing any extra reduction to be able to stop that block. And there are some removal bouncing cards that will affect most of these blockers as well. Taking a look at the rarity breakdown, as you can see, it's a nice spread. You got super rares, uncommons, and commons, all pretty much even there. And look, let's just say you shouldn't have a hard time finding some blockers. If you do, that's just really unlucky. That's all I can say. Let's take a look at ones that have some key abilities to be aware of. First one is Rosinante. On your opponent's attack, once per turn, you can set this character as active. So there is potential where you can get 2 blocks out of Rosinante in 1 turn as long as he survives the first attack. But otherwise, basically, you can be aggressive with the Rosinante and then still be able to use it as a blocker. So you'll swing in on your turn, you'll be rested. When your opponent attacks, you can restand and then block with him. So there you go. Nice way to be aggressive and have a nice defensive option. Next up, we have a Frankie. So Frankie is a 4 cost 5,000 power blocker with a 1k counter. The effect here is Dom -2. You may trash 1 card from your hand to draw 2 cards, so that can just help fix your hand. Really nice. Otherwise, a good blocker with some nice counter. Next up, we have Silver's Rayleigh, another 5 cost 6,000 body, 1,000 counter. The on-play effect is basically the blocker Queen's effect, but you do have a few more hoops to jump through. If your opponent has 2 or more characters with a base power of 5,000 power or more, you draw 2 cards and then trash 1 card. So you can see just jumping through a few extra hoops just to get that draw 2, trash 1 effect. Next up, we have the Tony Chopper. This is the one that's technically not a blocker, but becomes a blocker. So look at Tony's effect here. Basically, Don -1, you can set this character as active, and then it also gains blocker. Nice stat line, 5 cost 6,000 bodies. You can be nice and aggressive with it, but then also be able to restand, use as a blocker, similar to the Rosinante that we looked at previously. Next up, we have Doflamingo, also similar to the Tony Chopper and the Rosinante. End of your turn, if you have 2 more rested characters, so that does include himself, you can set this character as active. So a few cards you can be aggressive with, but also end up blocking with, which is really nice. Next up, we have a big boy blocker in Mihawk. 6 cost 7,000 body. The effect is on play, you draw 2 cards, trash 1. Next up, the Vanillas. So Vanillas are usually pretty good when it comes to the sealed events. Sanji as leader makes them a lot better as well. But as you can see with the vanillas that we got here on screen, we don't have a lot of low end stuff. So just be wary with vanillas, you don't have a turn 1 play really. You don't have a 1 cost or a 2 cost vanilla. You start at 3 cost. Most of them are 4 cost, 6,000 bodies. Your biggest one is your Jinbei with a 7 cost, 9,000 body. That is a monster. That's going to be really nice. Yeah, they're basically just good because they're nice, cheap, big bodies, have counter, good all round. And these are all common as well, so they should be super easy to find. Now we're going to talk about the counter events. All these are common as well, so they're all going to be super easy to find. These are the best ones. There are others, but they're just not good. I'll say that. But let's take a deeper dive into these, starting off with don't underestimate the power of miracles. This is a 1 cost event. You can buff something by 2,000 power. The trick is you can play a revolutionary army type character with a cost of 4 or less from your hand. May or may not come out, depends what you pull in your packs. A lot of the key cards aren't the revolutionary type, but yeah, if you have something you feel in some space and it's in your hand, great way to get extra body out. Next up, we have the Soul Frankie Swing Arm Boxing Solid. Yeah, that's a name. This one is also a 1 cost counter, buff something by 2,000 power. The other part of the effect is not going to be applied unless you're playing Rainbow Luffy or an Odyssey leader, which I wouldn't recommend playing any of the Odyssey leaders in this event. The trigger is nice, so you can rest one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. That's going to hit a bunch of stuff in this sealed format. And last of all, we have Black Vortex or Black Spiral. I don't actually know what is the official name of this in English, but the effect here is you can negate the effect of one of your opponent's leaders or characters, and then you can give that card minus 4,000 power during the turn. So it's basically a 4k counter for 2, which is really good. And then if it does have a nasty effect, like say maybe the Captain Kid that can restand itself, it won't be able to because you've stopped it with this card. The trigger effect is basically the first part of that. You can just negate the effect of a leader or character. So once again, good for those leaders like Captain Kid, or maybe even Shanks if they haven't used their effect. So yeah, good with those. Now let's talk about the removal that we have access to. These are the key ones, the best ones. There are some that do have some other sort of removal. We'll talk about them in the filler section, but these are the best ones that you can get. So we've got 3 characters, 2 events. The only one on there that may, like I almost put in the filler section, was the Sakazuki, but we'll talk about it in a second. You'll kind of see why. Few more hoops to jump through to get the removal effect compared to the other things here, but let's break them down and talk about it more. Quickly before we do that, the rarities of this one here. So the Beckman is a super rare. The Sakazuki and the Kuzan, the 2 other characters, are rares. Your events are common and uncommon, so most likely you're going to see one of those events. May or may not see any of these characters. First of all, the Kuzan here, 4 cost, 5,000 body, 1,000 counter. On play, you can put one of your opponent's characters at the cost of 3 or less at the top or bottom of their life. Then your opponent trashes 1 card from their hand. So that's actually a pretty decent effect. You're going to be hitting a lot of the basically the blockers with that cost threshold, but it's a nice way to also control the board, control your opponent's hand size, but then still be able to swing in at life or swing in a character that may have been protected by that blocker that you removed. Next up, we have the Sakazuki. So a nice stat, 6 cost, 7,000 body, no counter, which is a little bit sad. And the on-play effect here for the KOing, if you have 2 or more rested characters, you can KO one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less. The cost of 5 or less is nice. You're going to hit a lot of things, but sometimes might be hard to have 2 or more rested characters on board when you play the Sakazuki. So you might have to think ahead a little bit if you know you've got it in your hand, but it is good. Nice threshold, might be a bit hard to set up, so just be wary of that. Next up, we have the Beckman. This is definitely the best kind of removal that you have access to in the card pool for OP09. On play, you trash one of your opponent's characters with 6,000 power or less. If you have access to some power reduction cards, that becomes a lot better. But the biggest thing with this is super rare. It's going to be hard to see. So if you pull it, definitely put it in your deck. Speaking of the power manipulation stuff, let's look at the cards that we have access to. So these are the best ones that we have access to in the card pool, ranging a little bit in cost here, but nice to see most of them have counter, which is really good. So it's not going to be a dead card in hand. And the rarities here, a lot of them are common, so you're probably going to see them, which is really nice. So outside of comboing them with your removal cards, it's just good to lower the power of a character to be able to swing into it, clear the board that way, control the board that way, which is really nice in these events. First of all, let's talk about building Snake. This is basically the Gordon of OP09. You bottom deck this card to minus something by 3,000 power for the turn. Is an uncommon, so you may or may not see it. There is even a chance you might see multiple of them. But yeah, great one to put in there. Nice cheap way to get minus 3,000 power on something. Next up we have the Sachi and Penguin. When attacking, give up to one of your opponent's characters minus 2,000 power during the turn. Pretty good. Combo that with the Sanji, that's also pretty good. Play it, rush, minus something by 2,000 power when you attack. Next up we have the Bonker Punch. This has a couple of effects here. So on play you can play a monster, which we'll talk about that card in a moment. But the other effect is Don times 1. When attacking, this character gains 2,000 power during the turn. So it's not directly impacting one of your characters, but it has the same effect. You're buffing this guy and making it a bit bigger to be able to clear bodies on your opponent's side a lot easier. Next up we have the Yasop. This has a few different effects, both manipulating power. The first is on play, up to one of your leaders gains 1,000 power until the end of your opponent's next turn. So a nice buff on your turn and your opponent's turn. The other part of the effect is Don times 1. When attacking, give up to one of your opponent's characters minus 1,000 power for the turn. So you look at it, Yasop stats there, you're going to be swinging 7k at something that's going to be losing 1,000 power. So Yasop, decent card for the turn it's played, decent card for the turn right after when you get to swing with as well. Next up we have Brook. This 6 cost 7,000 body, 1,000 counter, so the biggest out of those power manipulation cards. The when attacking is you don minus 1. You can give up to 2 of your opponent's characters minus 2,000 power during the turn. So pretty decent. You can't target the same character twice. You can't minus 4,000 on one character. You got to spread it. But yeah, really good way to hit multiple things if your opponent's got nice and wide, got a few rested characters. Good way for you to be able to clear the board that way. All right, looking at some other key cards that if you see them, you definitely want to run them in the deck here. First of all, let's talk about putting 2 cost 1,000 counter, no power on play. If your opponent has 5 or more cards in their hand, your opponent trashes 1 card from their hand. They do get to choose what card to trash, but a great way to control your opponent's hand size in these events. Next up we have the Zoro, 3 cost 5,000 body, no counter. On play you don minus 1. The effect is then you can ramp a don as active. So basically Zoro becomes a 2 cost character. So you play him for 3, you minus 1 of those don that you use to play him, and then you get to bring it back as active. So essentially, as I said, making Zoro a 2 cost character, which is really nice. Next up we have the Teach. So 3 cost 4,000 body, 1,000 counter. Activate main, you may rest this card if your opponent has 3 or more cards in their hand. Then you draw 2 cards and you trash 1 card. So yeah, pretty good. As activate main, so you can use it multiple times. So if you're countering heavily, this is a great way to basically just get an extra draw, replenish your hand, maybe get rid of some bricks as well, so you have access to some more counters. Next up we have Gene Bart. First of all, this guy has vanilla stat lines with a counter automatically include. The effect here is actually part of some removal. Is pretty hard to get this off though. If your opponent has more Don cards on your field than you can carry something with a cost of 3 or less. So unless you see some other purple cards that Don minus, you're not really going to get this effect off. So that's why I say it can be hard. But if you do see some of them, you can get this effect off earlier. 3 cost or less is not hitting heaps of stuff. You're going to hit those little blockers, which is nice. Outside of that, not a whole lot going to be going on there. But otherwise, as I said, vanilla stat lines, 4 cost 6,000 body, you're going to run this. Next up, we have Robin, 6 cost 6,000 body, 1,000 counter. On play, if your opponent has 3 or more life cards, they trash the top life card. Pretty decent. The trigger is you can play a yellow character with a cost of 3 or less from your hand. There are some of them floating about, not heaps, but cool if you see that. Otherwise, I'll probably just keep my hand, slap that out, and make my opponent trash some life. Next up we have Sanji. This is a big boy, 7 cost 7,000 body, 1,000 counter. Effect is pretty good. You don minus 1. This character gains rush, and then you can rest one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 6 or less. This card's insane. Especially it has counter. I would expect this card not to have counter, but it's pretty good. Rush, resting something, so you can rest a blocker, rush at that blocker, rest a character at your opponent's face to go for game, apply more pressure that way. Pretty decent all-round card. Only thing is super rare, so probably not going to see it. If you do, you want to run it. Odin is another one here that is a pretty decent one. 9 cost 10,000 body, no counter, has double attack built in. That's pretty good. No other conditions to get it. You just have double attack. Nice on a big boy. On KO you can draw 2 cards and then you trash 1 card. So all around pretty decent card. Moving on to one of the secret rares. Both secret rares are in this part of the list here. This is the Luffy, 9 cost 10,000 body, no counter. On play you don minus 1, you draw a card and this character gains rush. pretty good. You can't complain with Rush. Rush is nice in these events. And be able to get an extra draw is also pretty good. Speaking of Rush, we've got another one here in Shanks. 10 cost, 12,000 body. All of your opponent's characters have minus 1,000 power. That is all the time on your turn, on your opponent's turn. Pretty good. And then you have Rush on top of that. This card's insane. Also super rare. So might not see it, probably won't see it. If you do, you are in luck. More Rush bodies. We've got Goldie Roger, the king of the pirates himself. 10 cost, 13,000 power body. This is the biggest body we've seen in One Piece, which is fitting for who this character is. The effect is this character has Rush, and then when your opponent activates blocker, and if you have 0 life or your opponent has 0 life, you automatically win the game. So if your opponent's sitting on 0 life, they have a couple of blockers, they're going to have to counter out of a 13k swing, which is usually pretty hard to do. Sometimes it is possible, but especially in these events where your counters are varied and that sort of stuff, it's probably going to get you the win there. Otherwise, you can also set yourself up where you're on 0 life, and you swing in and your opponent might not know the effect and block, and you just get a nice win that way. Moving on to the events that are pretty important here, we've got Gum Gum Jump Rope. This is a activate main, Dom -2. You can rest one of your opponent's character to the cost of 5 or less, then you draw a card. 5 or cost or less is going to hit pretty much all the blockers. There are a few that fall outside of that, which is the main reason you probably want to run this, but it does hit a lot of the other key characters, most of the vanillas there as well, so you can probably just try and clear board as well. And then the trigger is you ramp it on as active, which is also pretty good. So now we're going to be talking about the filler cards. So if you include all those cards we've spoken about before and you've still got some gaps, let's look at these. First of all, we'll look at the cards that combo well together, because that can be quite nice. If you see all these cards that we're going to talk about, pop them all in. The first one is the Bonk Punch. We know that's a key card. And then we've got the Monster. So the Bonk Punch on plays, you can play a monster, which is good. So you get 2 bodies out for 4 Don. Pretty good. And then the Monster's effect, if your Bonk Punch would be KO'd by an effect, you may send this card to the trash instead. As we saw, there's not a lot of KOing stuff. Sometimes they're pretty hard to see, but a great way to try and protect the bigger body there that gets the 2k buff when attacking. The other combo pieces are these blue boys here, the Moji, Richie, and Kabaji. All these cards are automatically going to be included, so there's nothing new here. We just haven't spoken about them. We've got the Moji and the Kabaji, which are 2k counters, and the Richie, which is a blocker. Moji's effect here is on play, you can look at the top 5 cards to find a Richie. You can add it to your hand if you do. And then you can play out a Richie from your hand. So this is similar to the Ohm and Holy combo. You don't have to find the Richie to then play the Richie. If you find it, great. If you have a Richie in your hand and you don't farm off the search, you can still play the Richie, which is pretty good. And then the Kabaji's effect here is if you have a Buggy or a Moji in play, this character cannot be KO'd in battle. So if you have the Moji out, the Kabaji is a sticky body that's not going anywhere. So the Moji can play out a blocker, you have the Kabaji out. You've got a blocker and a character that cannot be KO'd in battle. Pretty decent. Now, some other filler cards which have some decent effects are these guys right here. The first one we have is Pierre, which is a 2 cost, 2,000 body, 1,000 counter on play. You draw 2 cards, trash 2 cards. Great way to filter your hand. Is a trigger to play this card as well, so a nice way to get a cheeky small body out there, which you can slap a couple of Don under and be able to swing in. Next up, we have the Limb. The Limb has 2 effects. The first is basically a search effect. Look at the top 5 cards for an Odyssey type card. Add it to your hand. The rest go to the bottom of the deck. There are a few cards like your blockers. Some of those restanding blockers are Odyssey cards. So a couple of you I think it's one of your 2k counters is an Odyssey card as well. And then some of the cards we see lower down or on this page are also Odyssey cards. So a great way to find those, always nice. The other part of the effect is end of your turn. If you have 3 or more rested characters, including Limb itself, then you get to restand Limb. So a great way to protect a body. If you see it, is a super rare, so you might not see it. The Limb is also a nice stat line. It's basically a vanilla stat line, 3 cost, 5,000 power, just doesn't have a counter. Next up, we have the Bello Betty, 3 cost, 4,000 body, 1,000 counter. On play, if you have 2 or less life cards, you can draw a card. That's not bad. Is only a good effect late game. The trigger is not going to be viable unless you're playing your Rainbow Luffy, which will then let you play the card if your life total and your opponents add together is 5 or less. Next up, we have a Dio, which is a big boy, super rare, 9 cost, 9,000 body, no counter. The on-play effect is not going to work unless you have the Rainbow Luffy, which lets you set 3 Don as active when you play, making it a 6 cost body. The other part of the effect is on the opponent's attack. Once per turn, you can rest a Don and you can buff something by 2000 power for the battle. So it basically becomes a 1 cost 2k counter event essentially, which is pretty nice, and you can use that each turn, which is pretty good. Next up, we have the Lindbergh 3 cost 4000 body 1000 counter. On play, if your life cards and your opponent's life cards added together are 5 or less, you can carry one of your opponent's characters with 2000 power or less. That's not going to hit a lot. There are a couple of those blockers that will hit that threshold, but if you do see a lot of like power reduction cards, this card does become a lot more viable, which is pretty nice. Will become more viable kind of mid to late game rather than early game when you're both fairly healthy. The trigger is similar to the Bello Betty. Not going to work unless you have the Rainbow Luffy as your leader, if you're allowed to play that in your event. Next up, we have the Sabo, 5 cost, 6000 body, 1000 counter. When attacking once per turn, if you have 3 or more rested characters in play, you draw a card. So that also does include the Sabo itself. So you just need 2 rested characters before you swing the Sabo. Swing the Sabo counts as the 3rd one. You draw a card, which is actually really nice in these events. Next is the Luffy, the exact same stat line. On play, if you have 2 or more rested characters, choose up to one of your opponent's characters with the cost of 6 or less, or a Don, and you can rest them. So pretty good to be able to control the board. Great way to get around counter events, great way to get around blockers, control the board by resting some characters. Not a bad one there. And last of all, we have the Thunderlance Flip Pound Phoenix Shot. These Odyssey cards, like these event ones, they have the most amazing names, but is a 3 cost event. Activate main. If you have 2 or more rested characters in play, you can carry one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. Pretty decent. On average, you're going to be hitting some nice things with that. The trigger is you can rest something with a cost of 4 or less, so all around pretty decent. The 3 cost is a little bit hefty, but if you see it, great way to control the board. Next, we're going to talk about some fillers. If your leader is going to be the starter deck kid, the green one, which we spoke about in the beginning. These guys, so the first one here is the Captain Kid, 3 cost 5000 body, nice stat line there. On play, you can add the top card of your life to your hand if you have a leader with Kid Pirates, which Kid is. You can ramp a Don as active, so a great way to try and get ahead on curve there. You are taking a life, so you just got to be careful with that, but it turns your Captain Kid into like a purple Luffy, which is pretty nice. Next up, we have the Killer, 5 cost 5000 body, 1000 counter. On play, Don -1, restand your kid leader. Pretty good, not complaining right there. Great way to get a bit of extra aggression going on there. Pretty good, like late-ish game when you're not concerned about having that Don minus effect going on there. And then the other card here is Wire. This is a card you're automatically going to include because it is a 2k, but just good to know if you're going to run Kid as your leader, because the effect here is Don ×1 if your leader has 7000 power or higher and is a Kid Pirates type, which Kid is. This will gain Rush, so a great sort of Rush option just to be aware of if you're going to be running Kid as the leader. Next up, we'll talk about cards that are good if you're running Shanks as your leader, if you want to run some new stuff. First of all, the I Won't Forgive Anyone Who Messes With My Friends. This is a 2 cost event. Activate main. If your leader is Red Haired Pirates, which Shanks is, you can give up to one of your opponent's characters -3000 power for the turn, which is a good way to control the board, or make some blockers basically die when they try block with them. Then if your opponent has a character with 5000 power or higher in play, you get to draw a card. So a great way to basically not go negative from playing this card. And then the stage is actually not a bad one if you're playing Shanks. Activate main, you rest the stage. You can then give one of your opponent's characters -1000 power for the turn. Also not a bad one if you are allowed to play the Rainbow Luffy as your leader. Now, speaking of Rainbow Luffy, here it is. Let's talk about some cards that become better because this will be your leader. Mainly, this is going to be cards that are like archetype or name type locked, which Luffy then unlocks for you. So on screen we have an example of some of them. The best ones on here is definitely the Lucky Roo, because if you have a red-haired pirates, which probably should have been included in the last slide with the Shanks stuff, but if your leader is a red-haired pirates type, on KO you can carry something with 6000 power or less. Lucky Roo is a blocker as well, so automatically would have been included in your decks anyway. Next up we have the Devon, which is a 5 cost 6000 body, 1000 counter. Activate main. If your leader is Black Periods or Rainbow Luffy, you can choose one of the effects which Devon will gain, either double attack, banish, or blocker. Pretty decent, can't complain. The Burgess actually becomes a a pretty decent card. Automatically can't be KO'd by effect, so you may even want to include that as a filler card if you really need for your normal kind of leaders. But if your leader is Blackbeard Pirates or Rainbow Luffy, this character gains 1000 power for every 4 cards in your trash. So late game, pretty good. Your trash is not going to get massive in these events, but that 1 or 2k buff, 3k buff is going to be nice. The Liberation becomes pretty good. It's a 4 cost activate main. If your leader is Whitebeard Pirates or Rainbow Luffy, you can choose one of your opponent's characters and negate their effect for this turn. Then if that character has a cost of 4 or less, you can KO it, which is going to be hitting a bunch of things in this event. The trigger is you're going to negate one of the effects of your opponent's leaders or characters during the turn, also a pretty good trigger. The big boy blocker Teach becomes more than a blocker if you're running a Rainbow Luffy, or if you want to be super brave and run Teach as a leader. I would only do that if you see a lot of Blackbeard Pirate types though. But Teach, 10 cost, 12,000 body blocker, activate main. So if your leader is a Blackbeard or a Rainbow Luffy, sounding like a broken record here, and it was played this turn, up to one of your opponent's leaders effects are negated for the rest of the turn. Then up to one of your opponent's characters effects are negated and they cannot attack until the end of your opponent's next turn. So you're removing a leader's effect during your turn, which is good against Shanks and Bonnie, that sort of stuff. And then on your opponent's next turn, they have something that loses effect. So good on a blocker, you can take the blocker effect away, or you can also just stop something from attacking you as well, which is pretty good. Card that also becomes pretty good with Luffy as your leader is Gum Gum Giant, 1 cost event, Dom -2, trash a card from your hand. You can give something 4,000 power for the battle, and then you draw 2 cards. Card's insane. Next up, I've got Sabo. This is basically just to represent all the yellow trigger cards in this set, because a lot of the triggers allow you to play a character, but they either need to be Revolutionary Army or multicolored leader, which Luffy will unlock for you there. Some of them allow you to get some other effects going on, but your Rainbow Luffy will unlock all of those for you. So just check out your triggers. Next up, we have the Alvida, which is a 5 cost, 6,000 body, 1,000 counter. On KO, if your leader is Cross Guild or Rainbow Luffy, you can play 1 character with a cost of 5 or lower from your hand other than Alvida, which is a lot of things in this format, which is pretty decent. And then last of all, we have the Crocodile, which is a 4 cost, 5,000 body, 1,000 counter. If your leader is Odyssey, which Luffy will unlock for you, this character cannot be KO'd in battle by leaders. So it forces your opponent to swing in with characters at the Crocodile, which makes it a little bit annoying for them. On screen here I have OP-TCG.GG. These guys usually put out a 6-pack simulator for each set. They haven't got the 09 one up yet. I'm assuming it'll come pretty soon. They're usually pretty good with this, but as you can see, they've got all the other ones here in this drop down menu. How this works is you'll press the re-roll button here. This will simulate 6 packs. As you can see, these are the things that you get to there. You can do it multiple times, and then you can copy that list to the clipboard, open up your sim, pop it in there, and then you can do some custom games against your friends to practice for the sealed event. And there you go. That does it for our pre-release 2nd anniversary guide, tips, tricks, that sort of stuff. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are in the comment section down below. I'm only one person. I'm probably going to miss some stuff, so I'd love to be able to hear what your thoughts are on what to include and what not to include for these events. Best of luck with your events as well. Feel free to jump into our Discord. Let us know how you've gone in your event. Hopefully a lot of you guys take home the win. But stay beautiful. We'll see you all in the next one.